Hey guys, welcome back to my channel and welcome back to another Procreate tutorial. You guys seem to have really enjoyed the last two tutorials that I posted for Christmas and Valentine's Day, so I decided to make one for Easter as well. And if you haven't noticed already, every tutorials that I'm making is actually a little sneak peek into the courses that I have, and this particular Easter tutorial is going to be a sneak peek into my textile lettering masterclass. So all the tutorials I'm sharing on this channel are kind of like a little sneak peek into my courses and give you just a little taste. And obviously all of my courses go into a lot more details where I give you way more information as to why I make any design decision that I take during my process. You also get a lot more resources and you also get access to the student community where you can ask questions, get feedback on your work and ask me anything you want all the time. This is what you get in any of my courses. Now, if you're thinking of joining some of my courses, I would recommend you check out the Lettering Lounge, which will give you a 10% discount on all of my courses. So I'll make sure to link everything in the description. Now, before we begin this tutorial, make sure you download your freebies. I have provided a mini brush set with 6 brushes, I think, a color palette and a PNG template of the artwork. So as always, feel free to play with your own design. There is no right or wrong, but if you're a beginner, I would recommend just following the step exactly like I'm doing. And if you need to, feel free to pause the video, feel free to slow it down if things are going too fast. Feel free to speed it up as well if you're quite a Procreate expert. As always, if you have any questions, just leave them in the comments below and I will do my best to answer. All right, so let's get into it. Alright, so let's begin. The first thing you're going to do is download your freebies. So it should be a folder with 3 items in it. So you should have the Easter egg template, which is just a PNG file, and 2 Procreate files. One is the brush set, so these are your brushes, and the swatches, so this is the color palette. So if you tap on any of those 2, they should automatically open with Procreate. This one, however, we're going to tap on it. Here, you should be able to open it with Procreate. Within your apps, you should be able to find Procreate and it's going to send it to Procreate. And now just open up the app and it should be somewhere within your files. Okay. And the great thing about doing it like that is that you don't have to create a new document. It's already made for you. So the size of the document is 3000 by 3500 pixels. And you just open it and you probably won't see anything because the template is white, but we are just going to change the background color to black and you should have your template ready to go. Now, just a quick note, guys, this template is a custom typeface that I've created and it is available within my RetroSign Toolkit 2.0. So this is the typeface called Acrobats. So if you're interested in checking out this letter form as a reference, or if you want to purchase the actual typeface, it is available in that toolkit. So I'll make sure to link that in the description. However, feel free to use any shape you want, any piece of lettering. It will work just as well. As I always say, if this is your first time doing a tutorial with me, maybe just try and replicate exactly what I'm doing before you attempt it on your own. But if you feel confident enough, please feel free to do so. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is create a background. I'm going to create a new layer, which I'm going to move just below that template. Let's rename that template. I always like to rename my layers just so it's easier for you guys and for myself. And this one is going to be the background color, and I'm just going to grab that yellow from the Easter textile letter color palette. And then what I'm going to do is change the color of that E template, and I'm going to make it this blue color. Now, I am going to show you a technique that hasn't been covered in my textile lettering masterclass. It's a very basic technique of stitching. I just want to quickly mention before I begin, the textile lettering masterclass is going to be way more advanced than what we're going to cover today. So the technique I'm going to show you today will be just a very simple way of creating a textile effect, and it actually hasn't been covered in my textile lettering masterclass. So this is a great addition if you have already done the tutorial, and if you haven't, this is just the perfect little introduction. In my textile lettering masterclass, I go over more of this technique of like embroidery, and you actually learn 2 different styles. So you learn how to do the embroidery and the denim patch, which are 2 very distinctive techniques. And obviously in the course, I go into way more details on composition, on how I choose the colors, and all of the reasoning behind why I do the things I do. Whereas here in this tutorial, pretty much I'm just going to show you how to make it, but not really why I make it like that, if that makes sense. So if you're thinking of joining the textile lettering masterclass, this is what you'll be getting, which definitely goes into a lot more details. All right, so now let's go back to Procreate. The first thing I'm going to do here is lower the opacity of this shape, because we're going to create the outline and we're going to make it look like it has stitches all around that shape. So let's just lower the opacity just for now, just so we can see. It doesn't matter what opacity, mine is about 18%. And now I'm going to grab the vertical stitches from the brushes I have provided. And I'm going to be using the exact same color, so the same blue. And let's have a look. I think I'm going to make it maybe about 40%. And here, all I'm going to do really is go over the edges like that and kind of make it look like it's being stitched. Now that I look at it, I might make it a little bit bigger, guys. Let's go with 60%. I think that will be much better. Yes. And also feel free to make it whatever size you want, and whatever color, it doesn't really matter. And I'm just going over the edges like that. And what is great about this technique is that the more imperfect, the better, because textile lettering is not perfect. Okay, so you should have something like this, and now what I'm going to do is bring back the full opacity of that template. Bear with me, we are going to add a texture to this template so that the stitches are more visible. So I'm going to create a new layer just above this E template and make it a clipping mask. Now I'm going to grab possibly that yellow color from the color palette. I'm going to grab polka dot texture, and I'm just going to go over like this. So this should create like a nice texture. You're more than welcome to play with different modes here, guys. I really want to encourage you to try out different things. The way you use the textile lettering toolkit is completely up to you. There's so many ways you can make things look better and different, so feel free to experiment. I think the screen mode looks really nice. Personally, you can play with the add mode, which is a bit more intense, but screen is quite nice. So I'm gonna stick to that. Now, what I'm going to do is create a shadow effect behind those stitches so they look more realistic. So I'm going to select that layer with the stitches. Let's rename it. I'm going to duplicate it, then select the one underneath, and I'm going to change the blending mode to multiply. And I'm going to select it and simply move it down below a little bit. So I'm going to go on this side, so bottom right corner, and just pretend the light is coming from the top left. So hopefully you guys can see I have my stitches and the shadow just underneath. Now I might add a little bit of a Gaussian blur, maybe about 3% or even 2%. I'm going to duplicate that shadow, so just to make it more intense. So I have now 2 layers of shadow, and I'm just going to merge them together because they can be just one. You can see the shadow is quite intense. It really makes the stitches stand out. Now, to make it even more realistic, we're going to add a shadow behind everything else. So what I'm going to do is select the E template, so the actual main shape. I'm going to duplicate it once again,
select the one at the bottom, change the blending mode of this layer to multiply, and this time I'm going to be using the dark blue color from the color palette. So make sure you have changed the color of your layer to dark blue, and it should look something like this, quite intense. So I'm going to move it again in the same direction, so bottom right corner, but just a little bit, like just a tiny little bit, like it's barely visible. And what I'm going to do is add a bit of a Gaussian blur as always to make it look like a shadow. And I'm gonna lower the opacity because it doesn't have to be that dark. So 20% should be just enough. Again, feel free to play with different colors, feel free to play with different intensity. This is totally up to you. All right, it's already looking quite textile. So what we can do here is just add a bit of a texture in the background as well. So just above the background layer, I'm going to create a new layer, and this time I'm going to use the fishnet brush. Change the blending mode of that layer to multiply. Let's actually use the darker color. Let's use this one. If you zoom in, you'll see that it has like a fishnet texture now, and I think I want to make it a little bit bigger. So what I'm going to do is just select it, and I'm just going to increase the size, just like that. So you can see it's much bigger now. All right, it's looking pretty good so far. It's already looking quite realistic, but I think we can add even more dimension to the stitches so they look like they're kind of popping a bit more and have a bit more volume. So let's go back to our stitches layer, so the main one, not the shadow. I'm going to create a new layer just above the stitches. Make it a clipping mask. I'm going to create some shadow, so trying to give it dimension. So I'm going to change the blending mode of that layer to multiply because I'm creating shadows, and I'm going to use the smooth details brush. Let's go ahead and use the same blue, see what it looks like. Yes. So using the same blue as the stitches, I have my smooth details brush. I am going to lower the size of that brush, and all I'm going to do is try and create a shadow, pretty much just anywhere where you can see that shadow that we created underneath the stitches. I hope that makes sense, but anything that's kind of like on the right side, so on this side, is going to have some shadow. So wherever you can see the shadow underneath, this is where I'm going to place my shadow. So it doesn't have to be super perfect, so we're going to blur that in a minute, but just make sure you don't cover the entire stitches as well. Like you just want to cover kind of like just one half. Will make a lot more sense once we add the highlights as well. So I'm just going over the entire shape. I'm not putting too much pressure, and I'm trying to gradually add shadow, as you can see. Okay, so I'm gonna hide it so you can see the difference. So this is without, this is with the shadow. Hopefully you guys can see. I'm going to add just a little bit of a Gaussian blur just so it's a little bit more blended. So about 2% should be enough. And then I'm going to do the same thing but creating a highlight. So I'm creating a new layer, making it a clipping mask and changing the blending mode to screen this time and using the blue again. Let's have a look. Yes, that should look quite nice. Essentially, all I'm going to do is add a bit of a reflection on the side like that. I'm going to zoom in so you guys can see. What I'm trying to do is put a reflection wherever there is no shadow. So you can see the shadow underneath the stitches here, but you cannot see them here. So that's exactly where I'm going to position the highlight. So kind of positioning the highlight wherever I haven't put any shadow. as I always say, like I really want to encourage you guys to experiment. Like feel free to play with different intensity. You can add as many layers of shadow as you want. You can add as many layers of highlight as you want. This is totally up to you. Like there's not one way of doing things. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. I'm gonna duplicate it just to see if it's, yes, I like that. So I've just duplicated the layer. I'm gonna show that again. That layer with the highlight, which is set to screen mode, I'm just going to duplicate it just to make it more intense. And I'm gonna merge these two layers together. Might add 2% of Gaussian blur. Yep, that should be good. And quite happy with that. So when you zoom in, you can see it really looks like it's real textile, which is really cool. Okay, let's add a little bit of depth to the background as well. At the moment, it's a little bit flat. I'm going to just create a new layer just above the fishnet texture that we've added, just right above that. And I'm using the smooth details brush. It doesn't matter really. And I'm just going to create like a big oval shape just around the letter E. It absolutely does not matter if it's not centered or perfect, because we're going to blur it so much that it won't be visible. I am just adding color pretty much just like around the edges. Then within my adjustment, I'm going to add some Gaussian blur, and I'm gonna go 100% this time. So full Gaussian blur. What it does, it kind of creates like a shadow around the edges. So let's play with different blending modes. You can see here, like it would be really cool to use maybe the linear burn. That would work really well. There's some really cool things you can do with those blending modes, so feel free to play around with it. I'm just going to stick to multiply for now and lower the opacity to about 20%. What it does, it's just like really giving a bit of depth to the artwork, so it's not so flat. And now I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to create a highlight. So instead of adding a shadow, I'm adding a highlight. So I'm going to use that yellow color. And same thing, I'm going to create a big oval behind my E, just wherever you want to position it really. Like this doesn't have to be big. So it should look something like this. And it looks like an Easter egg. And then adding 100% of Gaussian blur. And then again, you can play with the blending mode. So lighten, screen would look pretty nice. Add, it's quite intense. Lighter color, which is nice. Overlay is quite good. I think I'm gonna stick to screen and just lower the opacity to maybe 20% again. So you can see it's very subtle. So that's without it, and that's with it. So you can see it's just adding a bit more depth to the background, which I really like. Now it's time to add some more details. I'm going to show you how I created like a stroke. So just to make that patch look a bit bigger, totally optional once again. I'm just going to grab this color and the smooth details brush, and I'm just going to kind of go around the edges like that and just draw my shape. Doesn't have to be perfect because we're going to add stitches once again. I'm going to go through that rather quickly because we have already covered this technique. So this is just showing you the same technique a second time. Okay, so you should have something like this. What I'm going to do is change the blending mode of the shape to multiply and just make it quite low opacity because I wanted the texture underneath to be see-through. Now grabbing the vertical stitches using that light yellow color, I'm just going to go around the edges and create the stitches. Exactly the same process as before. And then I'm going to duplicate it, select the one at the bottom and change the color to the dark brown. And let's move it below slightly. Change the blending mode to multiply. It might be that here it is not super visible, so what you can do is kind of just duplicate the stitches and it's just gonna make them look a little bit more full. So I'm doing that and blending them together. So I've got my layer underneath, which is the shadow. So same thing, I'm going to add a bit of a Gaussian blur. So something like this. And then to make it even more realistic, sometimes I like to combine two different colors for the shadow. So I'm going to duplicate it and select any of them and make it that blue color. And that's probably too much, so I'm going to lower the opacity. Please ignore my layers because at the moment I have quite a few because I did some testing, but I just want to show you the layers that I have. So I have 2 layers of shadow, one yellow, one on top, which is blue. If it was just the blue, it would look strange. If it was just the yellow, it wouldn't look quite realistic as well. But them together, it looks quite real. Again, no right or wrong, so feel free to play with different colors, different intensity, as many layers of shadow as you want. But I'm quite pleased with that. So let's go ahead and add the volume. I'm just going to add a clipping mask just over the stitches and change blending mode to multiply. And this time I might try to use the blue for the shadow. Something like that. I don't know. Let's stick with the brown, I think. Yes, much better. Again, just adding the shadow wherever I can see the shadow underneath the stitches. Now I'm going to show you how to add a cute little buttons because I think it needs some type of decoration. So let's go ahead and create a new layer above everything else, and here you can grab your button brush. I am just going to stamp it anywhere really because we're going to move them, so it doesn't really matter. Let's just stamp it right there. I think I'll make it about 55–56%. And then I'm going to create a new layer and a clipping mask. You guys know the drill. And I'm going to change the blending mode to multiply. So I'm just on that button layer and I've created a clipping mask set to multiply. I'm using the same color, using the Smooth Details brush. All I'm going to do is create like a shadow, but on kind of like half of the circle. So something like this. And now this is where the shadow is. So kind of like following the shadow I already have on this artwork and imagining the light is coming from the top left. So if I have a shadow here, I need to have one here as well, if that makes sense. So I'm going to rotate my canvas so it's easier to draw. And the great thing about drawing a button like that is that you can draw an arc and hold it, and it's gonna make it a perfect arc, perfect circle if you tap with one finger, and then you can just edit your circle and kind of position that arc wherever you want, like this. It already is looking like a button. You can intensify that shadow as much as you want, and here I'm going to do the same thing. So add a little bit of shadow on little holes at in the middle. something like that. Because it already looks quite realistic, which is so cool. Love it. And now we're going to do that again, but for the highlights. So create a new layer, make it a clipping mask, and change the blending mode to screen, I think. Yep, screen is fine. Like, you can use any mode you want. The add mode would work really well as well, but I think screen is a bit more subtle for this artwork. Something like that. I'm quite happy with that. Sometimes the first go is good, sometimes you have to redraw it 100 times. And feel free to change the size as well. If you make it bigger, it's just gonna soften that glow. You can also add multiple layers, like kind of emphasize some parts. Something like this. And there you have the button. So last thing we need to do is just add a shadow underneath. So I'm just going to duplicate the actual button shape. And let's grab the dark blue. I think the dark blue will look quite nice. And like that. So let's change the blending mode of that layer to multiply. So multiply and lower the opacity a little bit. You guessed it, we're going to add some Gaussian blur. And I think we are pretty much done with that button. Now, if you want to add multiple buttons, you don't have to redraw them 100 times, which is the magic of Procreate. So what we can do is just group all of our layers for the button together. So we've got a shadow, the actual button, the layer of shadow, and the layer of highlight. And you're going to group them. You should be able to duplicate it. And if you think you have too many layers and you want to merge layers together so that you kind of save layers, what you can do is just merge the button with its highlight and shadow, so just the top three together. However, if you will blend with the multiply layer at the bottom, it's going to change the entire blending mode of all of the layers. So it's going to kind of follow the layer at the bottom. So just keep it a separate layer, and that way you can just position your button wherever you want. You can make it smaller. And also, if you want to change the color, like, you don't have to redraw an entire button. What you can do, which is quite cool, is just create a new layer above your button, make it a clipping mask, and then you fill the entire layer with blue. Then again, you can play with different blending modes. So feel free to play with whatever you think is looking nice to you. So hue is quite nice, but it's quite bright, so I'm going to stick to the layer called color. And there you have it. So now I'm going to show you the final artwork, how I added the little flowers, then we can go over the very final adjustments. Alright guys, so this is what my artwork looks like at the end. I haven't shown you how I did the flowers. However, I promise you guys I used the same technique. So I created the shape of the flower, and then I added pink stitches here and yellow stitches here. I added the shadow just on the right hand side here using the pink, and the yellow shadow here as well. Then a little bit of highlight just on the left hand side here and here. I have played with multiple textures as well, so you can see I have the polka dots, but I also added a texture on top of everything, which is from my textile lettering toolkit, and it is just the nylon. So this is the texture I have used on top, just as an overall texture on top of everything else, which I think is not absolutely necessary, but it adds a bit of grain. Hopefully I've given you enough tips and you guys can create some amazing textile lettering as well. Now, one last thing I like to do is add a bit of noise and chromatic aberration. You guys know I love to do that to pretty much all of my artworks, but before I do so, I always make a duplicate because we're going to need to flatten the image and you don't want to lose your layers, so always create a duplicate. So I'm going to go in my gallery, select my artwork and hit duplicate. Now I can select the duplicate and we're going to merge all of those layers together. Now, when you merge your layers, you always want to make sure you have a full layer at the bottom. So the layer with no transparency at the bottom. So at the moment we have this yellow that we added. this is all good. You also want to make sure you don't have any hidden layers. So if you have a group that's hidden like that, this is going to mess up everything. So make sure everything is either deleted or visible. And then we can just select everything that we have. We can group it and click flatten. Nothing should move. If something has moved, it means that you probably have a hidden layer somewhere, or your bottom layer was not flat. It had some transparency in it. Okay, so I'm going to again duplicate that layer because I'm going to make changes to it, and if I don't like it, I like to be able to go back. What I'm going to do is add a bit of noise. I like to add about 5%, and a bit of chromatic aberration. I like to add about 5% as well. And that is everything, guys. This is all I did. And you can see it just add a bit of texture, a bit of noise, and I love the chromatic aberration because it kind of looks like a rainbow effect, and it makes it look more like a real photo than a digital artwork. And there you have it.
And that's it, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this mini tutorial, that you've created some cool textile lettering. As I said, if you want to take your textile lettering skills to the next level, I would recommend check out my textile lettering masterclass. You will also get exclusive brushes in this masterclass that are actually not included in my textile lettering toolkit. So make sure you check it out. And don't forget to join the lettering lounge so you can get 10% off. Oh, and one last thing, make sure to tag me. I absolutely love seeing what you guys create, so never feel bad for tagging me in your work. Thank you so much, and I'll see you guys in the next video.